My name is Lauren Castillo. I'm 38 years old. I've saved lives with my own two hands without flinching. But nothing prepared me for the day my ex-mother-in-law walked up to me in my hospital hallway and demolished 7 years of my life in front of 60 witnesses. She said something so cruel that it made my blood go cold. And when I answered her back, I had no idea that a man was about to walk through that door and prove everything she'd been saying was a lie. Subscribe right now. This story is about quiet revenge, the kind that doesn't shout, kind that waits. And then it lands like truth. Comment exposed if you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted. It was a Wednesday afternoon and I was finishing my second 12-hour shift in a row at Meridian Regional, a mid-size hospital outside Nashville, Tennessee. I worked as an ER attending physician. 13 years of trauma bays. 13 years of emergency decisions. Steady hands. Steady mind. I was cutting through labor and delivery on my way to the parking garage, a shortcut I'd used 100 times, when I saw her standing there. Gloria Hartwell. My ex-mother-in-law. She had a gift bag with pink tissue paper. New baby gifts. Celebration colors. And that smile. The same smile she'd worn at church dinners for years. Kind of smile that looked like a door slamming in your face. She looked me up and down, scrubs, stethoscope, for hours of sleep behind my eyes, and I watched something shift in her expression. Her chin came up. And then she said it. Loud. Deliberate. Loud enough that the charge nurse behind the station went very quiet. Loud enough that 2 orderlies slowed their steps. Leaving you was the best decision my son ever made. He's got a beautiful baby girl now with a real woman. Someone who could actually give him a family. 7 years. 7 years of being called the empty one. The incomplete one. The woman who couldn't. All of it packed into 12 seconds and delivered in a public hallway like a verdict. I felt my hand find the copper bracelet on my wrist, the one my grandmother left me, the one I press against when something is too big to fight in public. I pressed it. And I kept my voice steady. Is that right? I asked. Gloria blinked. She'd been expecting tears. She'd been expecting me to crumble right there between the maternity beds. She got nothing. Just a woman who looked completely composed. Is that really what you believe? I asked again, softer this time. And somewhere down that corridor, a set of automatic doors hissed open. I didn't look yet. I already knew what I'd set in motion. I just didn't understand how massive it was about to become. I grew up in Clarksville, Tennessee. Kind of town where everybody knows what you're having for dinner before you do. My mom worked at a dentist's office for 22 years. My dad drove long-haul trucks until his knees gave out. I was the first person in my family to get to college. The first to go past it. I worked nights at a Waffle House through undergrad. I took out loans that took me 10 years to pay back. And when I finally got my MD and landed a position in emergency medicine, I felt like I had proof of something. Proof that being underestimated hadn't broken me. I learned early on how to be still under pressure. When someone is bleeding on your table, you don't panic. You don't explain yourself. You assess. You act. You move on. That steadiness served me well in the trauma bay. But it had a shadow. I carried things alone. I didn't ask for help. And when people started building false stories about me, when the lies started spreading like gossip always does in small towns, I did the absolute worst thing a quiet woman can do. I trusted that the truth would somehow sort itself out. It didn't. I married Derek Hartwell when I was 29. He was the kind of man who filled a room. Confident, charming, the type who remembered names and asked about your family. Most of Nashville would have vouched for him. And for the first few years, so would I. We wanted children. We tried for years. And when nothing happened, that empty space sat in our house like a storm nobody wanted to name out loud. Like a third person at the table. Like a ghost. For about 2 years, I suggested we both get tested. Standard workup. Basic blood panels and imaging. Kind of thing I ordered for patients twice a week as a doctor. Simple. Easy. Derek refused. He laughed it off at first. Then he got quiet about it. He said Hartwell men didn't need clinics. He wrapped it in spiritual language about trusting God. And every time I pushed, the conversation got closed a little faster, a little harder. So I went and got tested alone. My results came back completely normal. I sat in my car in the clinic parking lot with that paper in my hands and read it twice. I wasn't sick. I wasn't broken. I was fine. So if it wasn't me, what was it? I didn't have an answer. I couldn't force one. So I filed it away and hoped time would fill the gap. What I didn't know was that Derek had already started whispering to people. Starting with his mother. Gloria Hartwell ran the women's circle at her church the way a general runs a battalion. She'd raised Derek alone after his father passed when he was young, and somewhere in all those years of sacrifice, she'd decided her son was perfect because he had to be. His success was proof that everything she'd given up had been worth it. So when Derek quietly suggested the problem in our marriage was probably medical, probably me, Gloria didn't ask a single question. She picked it up and she ran. Started small. A sigh at a neighborhood cookout. A hand squeeze at a birthday party. Poor Derek. He wanted a family so badly. Then it grew teeth. One Sunday at a potluck, she introduced me to a visiting couple from her sister church with a look of manufactured pity. This is Lauren, Derek's wife. She's a doctor, you know. Such a shame about the children. The visiting woman gave me a slow, sad nod. And I understood that whatever story had been told, it had already landed before I walked in. I stood there holding a paper plate while Gloria patted my hand like I was the one who needed comforting. And then she said the line she'd say again and again for the next 7 years. The line she delivered with absolute certainty. Some women just aren't built for certain things. It's not their fault. Some women are just different. She believed every word of it. That was the part that gutted me the most. She wasn't being cruel on purpose. She was repeating what her son had handed to her, polished and packaged, and she'd never once questioned whether it was true. And I never once said a word to correct her. I drove home that night and said nothing to Derek. I was still convinced that patience was the same thing as virtue. That staying quiet was the high road. It wasn't. It was just the road that let them keep walking all over me. But there was more. There was always more. Danielle Cho had been my best friend since we were 17 years old. We met in AP Chemistry junior year of high school, bonded over a failed experiment and an equally terrible lab report, and stayed connected through every life change that came after. Different colleges. Different cities. Years between us. Bad breakups. Worse apartments. She was at my wedding. Front row. Crying before I even got to the altar. So when the church whispers started getting loud, when the looks got heavier and the pity got impossible to bear, Danielle was who I called. She'd come over with wine and takeout and let me spiral, and she always had the right thing to say. Looking back now, every single comfort she offered had a hook hidden somewhere inside it. You're so driven, Lauren. Maybe motherhood just isn't your path right now. Derek loves you so much. Don't let his mom get in your head. You don't need a baby to be a complete woman. You know that, right? Kind words. Soft words. But they all pressed on the same bruise. They all reminded me of the thing I supposedly lacked. I didn't notice how often her eyes drifted to Derek across a room. I didn't notice how she'd started knowing his schedule better than I'd told her. I was too grateful to have one person who didn't seem to be judging me. And she was sitting in my living room telling me I deserved better when what she actually meant was that she deserved my life. Derek filed for divorce on a Friday afternoon. I came home to find a letter on the kitchen counter and a closet that was already half empty. He didn't even wait to tell me in person. Within a week, he'd moved into Danielle's townhouse across the city. And the story that got written about me was clean and cruel and perfectly designed. Lauren was cold. Lauren was too married to her job. Lauren couldn't give Derek what he needed. And a man wants a family, doesn't he? Gloria made sure every pew in Davidson County heard it. Danielle said nothing to correct any of it. The two people who had known me longest let me become a cautionary tale. And I didn't fight it because fighting felt like proving them right. I just went back to work the next morning and I said a dislocated shoulder and I talked a scared teenager through 14 stitches and I told him he'd be fine. And he was. And that felt like the only true thing I did that entire week. If you've ever swallowed a lie about yourself just to keep the peace, if you've ever let people you loved hand you their shame and wear it in public, then you know what that tastes like. Tastes like blood you're not allowed to spit out. Drop truth in the comments if you've been there. Keep watching. Because the silence didn't last. The story was about to get much bigger. The lie stopped being just about my marriage the day it walked into my hospital and cost me everything I'd actually built. For 9 years, I'd been on track to lead the emergency department at Meridian Regional. I had written half the trauma protocols that the entire network ran on. I had the hours. I had the results. I had the evaluations. Every single metric said the position was mine. Then the whispers reached the credentialing committee. Not facts. There were no facts to find. Just the shape of gossip dressed up as concern. Dr. Castillo's personal situation has been unstable. There are questions about her judgment. Did you hear about the divorce? Her ex-husband's family says she struggled. One board member, a man who golfed with Derek's uncle every other week, started asking pointed questions about whether I could handle leadership under stress. As if I hadn't spent 9 years keeping people alive under the worst kind of stress there is. Life and death decisions every single shift. When the announcement came, the department chair went to someone with half my hours and not one original protocol to his name. They told me I was a strong candidate. They told me it had been a difficult decision. What they didn't tell me was the truth. But I grew up in a small town. I knew the sound of a verdict dressed up as a compliment. That night, I drove home and I sat in my parking lot for an hour in the dark. And something shifted inside me. A lie about my body had cost me my marriage, and I'd let it because I thought endurance was the same as dignity. But now that same lie had reached the one place I'd never let anyone touch. My work. My name. The career I'd bled for. I sat in that car for a long time. And then I started making calls. If a woman standing up for herself is your kind of story, hit subscribe. Tell me in the comments, where would you have stopped? A colleague I trusted, another attending in the ER, gave me the name of an attorney named Ruth Nakamura. Her office was on the second floor of a building above a dry cleaner's on the east side of Nashville. She had reading glasses pushed up into gray hair, and she had the kind of face that told you she'd already heard worse and wasn't impressed by any of it. I told her everything. The marriage. Potlucks. Church whispers. The board. The job I'd lost. She listened without interrupting, which I later learned was her version of paying close attention. When I finished, she set down her pen and looked at me over her glasses. What you're describing could be actionable defamation, she said. Possibly a false light invasion of privacy claim. But I won't lie to you. It's hard to win. She laid it out plainly. To prevail, we'd need to prove 3 things. That a specific false statement had been made, that it had been communicated to other people, and that it had caused me real, measurable harm. The harm part you've got, she said. A lost promotion has a dollar amount. That's the easy part. I turned my grandmother's bracelet around my wrist. And the false part? Ruth looked at me steadily, carefully. That's the part you have to be willing to fight about in public. They'll argue the statement was true, that you really couldn't have children. To win, you'd have to prove it wasn't you. My stomach dropped. I couldn't prove that. My test results were normal, but normal doesn't name anyone. It only says it wasn't mine. I almost stood up and left right then. Then Ruth said something that changed everything. Silence isn't noble, Lauren, when it's costing you your career. When it's costing you your name. Sometimes the most generous thing you can do for yourself is make them prove what they're saying. I didn't answer right away. But I didn't leave either. I sat there for another 20 minutes, asking questions. Ruth answered each one like she'd been waiting for this exact moment. When I finally walked out of her office, I still didn't know if I'd do it. But I knew I was thinking about it differently now. I spent 2 weeks deciding. I'm not impulsive. I never have been. I make decisions the way I read a chart, slowly, carefully, then all at once. I wrote down everything I stood to lose. The church community that watched me grow up. My standing in Nashville that was already half destroyed. The way people would talk about me. I knew exactly how that story would go. She sued her ex's mother out of bitterness. Couldn't let it go. Became the bitter ex-wife. But then I wrote the other column. My name. My work. The truth. And the simple fact that I had done nothing wrong and was being punished for it anyway. I kept coming back to one thing. I wasn't doing this to hurt Derek. If hurting him had been the goal, I'd had a year of opportunities. I was doing this so that a hospital board would stop believing a lie. So that the next time my name came up in a room I wasn't in, it came up clean. That was the line I drew, and I drew it on purpose. This wouldn't be revenge. Revenge is loud and hungry and never satisfied. This would be the truth, said once, in a place where it counted, by someone who'd finally decided she was done carrying a lie that belonged to other people. I called Ruth on a Monday morning before my shift started. I'm in, I said. But I want you to promise me something. I don't want to become someone small and vengeful. I want this to be about the truth. Just the truth. Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then let's make them say it under oath. I hung up and walked into the trauma bay, and I had the most focused, steadiest day I'd had in a year. Turns out a made-up mind is its own kind of calm. Ruth filed the complaint over the next few weeks. Named the specific statements, the dates, the witnesses who'd heard them at church dinners and neighborhood events. Documented the lost promotion, the salary difference, everything. When it hit the courthouse, the news moved through Nashville faster than any ambulance I'd ever ridden in. Gloria called people. She told the women's circle I'd become vengeful and angry. She doubled down on every word she'd ever said, which, as Ruth had hoped, is exactly what guilty people do when they think the best defense is just being louder. Mark stayed quiet. So did Danielle. But I started getting messages from women I'd never met. One read, "Good for you." They did the same thing to my sister. I didn't respond to any of them. I let the case move at the speed of the law. Then came the other side's response, and Ruth explained what it meant. They've got two roads, she told me. They can argue the comments were just personal opinion, emotional, nothing actionable. That's annoying for them, but survivable. She tapped her pen on the desk. Or they can plant their flag and argue the statements were absolutely true. That you really were the reason. That road, that's the one I'm hoping they take. Why? I asked. Ruth looked at me with the small, quiet smile of someone who already knew the answer. Because then they have to prove it. They took the second road. Derek's attorney filed a defense that stated in plain legal language that the statements about me weren't false at all. They were true. The infertility was medical. And the cause was definitely, absolutely medically me. Ruth called me when she got the filing. They just said the magic words, she told me. There was something sharp and satisfied running under her professional calm. Truth is a legal defense. But here's what they didn't think through. She walked me through it carefully. To prove the statement is true, to prove you were the one who couldn't, they would have to put both of your medical records in front of a judge. And by swearing under oath that the cause was you, they've handed me a reason to ask about him. It's not a guarantee. Judges protect medical records carefully. But it's a crack in the wall, Lauren. And I can work with a crack. That night I couldn't sleep. So I did what I always do when something won't settle. I went back through the timeline in my head, the way you reread a chart looking for the thing you missed the first time. And I found it. 6 years into the marriage. A Tuesday when Derek had driven up to Vanderbilt Medical Center alone for what he called a routine checkup. He'd been gone all day. He came home different, quieter than usual, short with me over nothing, poured himself a glass of scotch before dinner, which he almost never did on a weekday. I'd asked if everything was okay. He'd said the doctor had been useless, the whole trip was a waste of time, and he changed the subject so hard it left a bruise in the room. And here was the thing that kept me awake that night. After that day, he never once brought up the idea of getting tested again. Before the appointment, he'd at least pretended. After it, the subject was simply closed. Permanently. And in that same stretch of weeks, the whispers about me began. I'd filed it away at the time as Derek being moody after a bad appointment. I'd never connected it to anything because I hadn't been looking for a lie. But now, with Ruth's words fresh in my ears, that Tuesday looked like something entirely different. It looked like the moment something got decided. The moment Derek learned something he couldn't face, and chose instead to hand it to me. I called Ruth first thing the next morning. She listened without writing anything down, which I'd learned meant she was fully locked in. "It's nothing on its own," she said when I finished. "A memory of a bad afternoon. But it's a reason to ask the right question. Because the other side had sworn that my fertility was at issue, because they'd argued under oath that the cause was me, Ruth could now ask the court to compel Derek's medical records. "You can't open a door halfway," Ruth said. "If he wants to claim it was you, the law lets me ask to see whether it was him." She filed the motion the following week. Derek's attorneys fought it hard. They argued privacy. They argued relevance. They threw every objection they had at it. And I understood that I'd touched something real, because nobody fights that hard over nothing. The waiting period was the hardest part. The judge would rule soon. And when she did, either the truth would finally come to light, or Derek would find some legal loophole to keep it buried forever. I went to work. I set bones. I read scans. I talked frightened patients through difficult news. And I waited. Subscribe if you want to know what the judge decided. Comment waiting if you've ever had to wait for justice. The judge's ruling came on a gray afternoon in the middle of a slow shift. Ruth called and I stepped into the medication supply room to take it, surrounded by locked cabinets and fluorescent light, my heart doing something it never does at work. "She granted it," Ruth said. "With limits." But she granted it. The judge had found that because the defense had openly claimed my fertility was the issue, Derek's own reproductive records had become, in the court's language, required to show. They'd be produced under a protective order, reviewed by attorneys and the judge, used only as the case required. "It's not a guarantee," Ruth said. "We don't know what's in the file. But they can't keep it shut anymore." I stood in that supply room and let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for 7 years. Later, I learned what was happening across town. Derek's attorney had called for a private meeting that same afternoon. Gloria had called Ruth's office twice and been told politely that the attorney could not speak with her. And for the first time in years, the people who'd spent so long deciding what was true about my body went very quiet at the thought of a court deciding what was true about his. I didn't celebrate. I finished my shift, charted my patients, drove home alone. But that night I slept all the way through for the first time in months. 'Cause I knew the folder was coming. And folders don't lie. The records arrive 12 days later, and I need to be precise about how this happened because it matters. I did not see them first. I couldn't have, and I wouldn't have. I'm a physician. I know what patient privacy means, and I respect it absolutely. Derek's records went directly to Ruth through the proper legal channel, under the protective order. She reviewed them with the opposing counsel present, as required by law. Then she called and asked me to come to her office. She'd never done that before. I knew before I sat down. She had the careful face that people get when they're about to hand you something heavy. 7 years ago, she said, Derek went to a fertility specialist at Vanderbilt. The one you remembered. She slid a single sheet of paper toward me. Just one line visible, the rest sealed under the court order. The diagnosis was a word I had written on charts hundreds of times. Esospermia. No measurable sperm. Derek had been told, in plain clinical language, that he could not father a biological child. 7 years ago. The same week he came home quiet and sharp and changed the subject so hard it left a mark. The same stretch of weeks when the first whispers about me began. I sat very still. For a long moment I didn't say anything. I didn't cry, didn't shout, didn't rage. I felt something enormous and quiet rearrange itself inside me, like a bone sliding back into a joint it had been locked out of for years. For 7 years I had been the broken one. The hollow one. The shame of the Hartwell family. Whispered about at potlucks and prayer circles and church suppers. And the man who had let an entire city believe that had known with medical certainty the entire time. He had handed his shame to me. And his mother had pinned it on with both hands. I drove home with that single page folded in my bag and didn't turn on the radio. I had braced for triumph. I had honestly worried about what triumph would feel like, worried it would make me into something small and vindictive. But triumph never came. What came instead was grief. 6 years of my life had been spent absorbing a wound that was never mine to carry. Every slow nod at a potluck. Every some women just aren't built for certain things. Every night I'd laid awake wondering what I'd done wrong, what I'd failed to give, why my body had supposedly betrayed everything. All of it, a story Derek wrote to cover a truth he couldn't face. I sat in my car outside my apartment, the way I always seemed to end up sitting in cars at the turning points of my life, and said something out loud to no one. Is that right? The same thing I'd said to Gloria in that hallway. Only now I finally understood what I'd been asking all along. And then a new question formed. If Derek had been told 7 years ago that he could not father a biological child, if the diagnosis was accurate and final, then the baby girl Gloria had been bragging about in that hospital hallway couldn't be his. The arithmetic was brutal and simple. A man with that diagnosis does not father a biological child without medical treatment. Treatment Derek had never sought, never mentioned, never pursued. Which meant either the clinic at Vanderbilt had made a catastrophic error, or the baby everyone believed was Derek Hartwell's daughter had been fathered by someone else entirely. And suddenly Danielle's text message from months ago made a horrible, perfect kind of sense. Please don't do this. Think about the baby. She wasn't worried about my lawsuit hurting Derek's feelings. She was worried about what a room full of medical records would force into the open. Because Danielle knew something that Gloria and the women's circle and the entire Hartwell side of Nashville didn't. She knew whose baby it really was. I thought about Marcus Webb, the quiet man Danielle had been seeing before Derek. The one she'd apparently cut off completely when she chose Derek. The one she'd never told about a due date. Never mentioned a hospital. I called Ruth immediately. I think there's more, I told her. Much more. She didn't even pause. Then let the court find it. Not us. And that's exactly what was about to happen. The man who walked through those hospital doors the day Gloria ambushed me, the one I mentioned at the very beginning of this story, had a name. Marcus Webb. I didn't know him that day in the hallway. I learned who he was the same way I learned everything in this story, slowly, methodically, through the proper channels. During the months that Derek and Danielle were together, while Derek was still telling Nashville that I was the broken one, Danielle had been involved with Marcus too. He was quiet, steady, dependable. And he had been led to believe the relationship meant something more than Danielle intended. When she chose Derek, she cut Marcus off completely, blocked his number, went silent, never mentioned a due date, never breathed a word about a hospital. She had gambled that he would simply disappear, that he'd never connect the timeline. But the timing had never sat right with him. He'd quietly asked questions of the few people they both knew. And that very morning, one of those friends had mentioned a hospital name and a date that made everything click into place. So he came to see the child he suspected was his. And the moment he walked through that door in the labor and delivery wing, the moment Danielle looked up and saw him, all the color drained from her face. Because he was the one person she'd been absolutely certain she'd never have to face. That's the picture I want you to hold in your mind. Gloria Hartwell, standing by the elevator, delivering her little verdict on my life. Certain that her son's perfect life had proven me worthless. And 5 steps behind her, through a set of automatic doors, the living proof that the perfect life was built on exactly the same kind of lie they'd buried me under for 7 years. I didn't engineer that moment. I didn't even understand it when it happened. I just stayed calm, said my 2 words, and then a door opened, and a house of lies that had been standing for 7 years started quietly, methodically coming down, without me lifting a hand. Marcus Webb had questions that a family court could answer. And in a city where everyone had been so sure they knew the truth about my body, the truth about everyone else's was about to get its day. But before we get to the courthouse, I need to tell you what Derek did. What he understood. He stood in a parking lot in Nashville having known for 7 years that he could not biologically father a child. So when Danielle's pregnancy was announced, he knew with absolute clinical certainty that baby was not his. And he took it anyway. He stood in front of his mother and his friends and his entire social world and let them believe he had made a daughter. The daughter his barren first wife had been unable to give him. He used a child that wasn't his as the final punctuation mark in a sentence he'd been writing about me for years. That is not the story of a man who made a mistake. That is the story of a man who used an innocent child to protect his own image. Ruth's settlement offer came in, and it was, by the numbers, a win. A private payment, a quiet retraction to the hospital board, my professional record cleared. All I had to do was seal everything and never speak of it. I said no. Not out of spite. Let me be absolutely clear about that. I said no because a private retraction delivered in a back room is just a quieter version of the same lie. They'd said it about me out loud in churches and at dinner tables and at potluck fundraisers. Correction had to live in the same place. Not a whisper. Not a sealed drawer. Truth said once where it counted in front of the same people who'd believed the lie. I'm not going to whisper an apology for a wound someone else handed me, I told Ruth. She capped her pen. Then we go to court, she said. Where's something you can breathe in? Gloria came to see me before the hearing. She showed up at my apartment on a Sunday in her church clothes, and I almost didn't open the door. When I did, she looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. Something in her was already cracking. She didn't apologize. I want to be honest about that. She stood in my doorway and asked me to drop the suit, not for Derek, she said, but for the family. For the baby. For the name. And as she spoke, I saw something I hadn't expected. I saw a woman who had been lied to by her own son for 7 years. A widow who had built her entire sense of self around the certainty that her boy was good. She hadn't spread those cruel words because she was a monster. She'd done it because Derek had handed them to her, polished and packaged, and she had loved him too much to ever doubt him. For one breath, standing in my own doorway, I felt genuinely sorry for her. And then she said it again. The line she had been saying for years, except this time it was a plea instead of a proclamation. Some women just aren't built for certain things, Lauren. Why drag everyone through the mud over it? Even now. Even standing at the edge of the truth. She would rather protect the lie. Sympathy is not the same as surrender. Gloria, I said quietly. Go home. The mud was never mine. She left without another word. I closed the door. And I didn't feel cruel. I felt finished. The hearing was held in Davidson County Courthouse on a cold, bright February morning. I expected nerves. I had run 100 codes without my hand shaking. But this was different because this time the thing on the table was me. The room filled in the particular way that tells you everything about how small cities work. 2 members of the hospital board, the ones who'd made the call that cost me the promotion. Several women from Gloria's church circle, the same ones who'd nodded along to my ruin for years. Gloria herself, rigid in the second row. Derek beside his attorney, pale and sweating in a suit that looked like it belonged to someone more confident. Danielle in the back, holding very still. And 2 rows behind her, Marcus Webb. She could feel him there without turning around. I know because I watched her stop breathing. Ruth didn't raise her voice once. That's what I remember most clearly. She built the case the way I build a diagnosis, one finding at a time, calm and methodical, until the only possible conclusion was the one still standing. She laid out the statements, the dates, the witnesses, Gloria's own words repeated at neighborhood cookouts and church dinners. Some women just aren't built for certain things. She documented the harm, the lost promotion, the salary difference, the years of professional damage to a name I had spent a decade earning. Then she addressed the defense's claim, their sworn claim, that the statements were true, that the infertility was mine. And she asked the court to consider the records that the defense's own strategy had forced into the case. Under the protective order, only the necessary line was read. 7 years ago, Derek Hartwell was diagnosed at Vanderbilt Medical Center with a condition rendering him medically unable to father a biological child. The room changed temperature. I watched the church women turn to look at Gloria. I watched Gloria go the color of paper. Then Ruth, gentle as anything, laid the final contradiction on the table, the one the Hartwells had built with their own hands. The defense had sworn the empty marriage was my fault. The record said it was Derek's. And there was, by the family's own proud account, a baby daughter. She noted simply that the question of that child's paternity had become relevant to custody and support proceedings in a related court, and that preliminary genetic testing in that proceeding had not supported Derek's biological paternity. She said it the way you'd read a lab result. No drama. No theater. Just the facts. Just the truth. And that was when Derek stood up. You can't, that's not, his voice cracked and broke across the courtroom like something cheap that had been asked to hold too much weight. The judge told him to sit. Gloria was on her feet as well, saying my name like I had done something to her, saying it couldn't be true, saying I had twisted everything. The 2 of them, loud and unraveling, while I sat at that table perfectly, completely still. And then Gloria turned to face me directly. Her composure was completely gone. Her church supper certainty had cracked wide open, and what came out of the wreckage was the only thing she had left. Some women, she said, voice shaking, finger pointing straight across that courtroom at me, just aren't built for it. Some women just. She couldn't finish it the second time. I stood up slowly. 'Cause I had waited 7 years and I was not going to rush this. I kept my voice flat and steady. The voice I use when I have to tell a family something true and hard in the middle of the night. The voice that is calmer than the room can stand. You're right about one thing, Gloria, I said. The whole courtroom went silent. There was someone in that marriage who couldn't have biological children. I let it sit in the air for a moment. That person's medical file sits in a courthouse right now. His name is on it. Only his name. Gloria's arm dropped. Derek put his face in his hands. And the women from the church circle, the ones who had nodded along to my ruin for 7 years, sat there with the truth finally settling over them like weather, rearranging everything they thought they knew. I hadn't shouted. I hadn't cried. I'd said it once, out loud, where it counted, in a room full of the people who'd believed the lie. And then I sat back down and let it be done. What followed wasn't dramatic in the way you might imagine. There was no shouting match, no one dragged out. It was quieter than that, and somehow worse for the Hartwells because of it. Derek didn't deny it again. He couldn't. He sat hunched at his table while his attorney asked for a recess, and when the judge granted it, he didn't get up. He just stayed there, staring at nothing, a man watching 7 years of careful storytelling collapse in a single morning. Churchwomen gathered their things and filed out with their eyes down. I knew that by evening, the real story would be moving through Nashville as fast as the lie ever had. Faster, probably. Gloria followed them out, smaller than I'd ever seen her. The general of no campaign anymore. Danielle slipped out during the recess. But not before Marcus Webb rose from his seat 2 rows back and walked out the same door, 30 seconds behind her. Question of that child's paternity, now before a family court, could finally be answered honestly. I sat at Ruth's table and let the room empty around me. She put a hand on my shoulder. "You did all of that without raising your voice," she said. "I've been doing this for 28 years. You'd be surprised how rare that is." I wasn't surprised. Quiet had always been my strength. I'd just finally learned to aim it. The measurable things came in the weeks following, the way they always do. Derek's standing in Nashville simply evaporated. You cannot outrun a courthouse in a city that size, and the truth, once it's in the public record, goes where it wants to go. He left within a few months, relocated somewhere out west, I heard, a place where nobody knew the story yet. He had spent 7 years making sure everyone believed a lie about me. Truth didn't need me to chase him. Just needed to be said once in the right room. The hospital board didn't make a production of it. A few weeks after the hearing, the department chair asked to see me. He was one of the 2 who had sat in that courtroom, and he had the uncomfortable look of a man who had believed the wrong thing and knew it. He told me the leadership position was open again. He told me the earlier concerns about my judgment had been found to be without foundation. He didn't quite apologize, but he came close. From a hospital board, close is about all you ever get. I took the job. Not because I needed to win one more thing. Because it had been mine, built with my own hands and my own years, and I was not going to let a lie keep it from me a single day longer. My first week as department lead, I walked into the ER and breathed in that clean antiseptic smell, the one that used to mean I was somewhere safe because it was the only place no one called me hollow. Smelled different now. Smelled like something I had earned and fought for and gotten back. I ran my first code as attending lead with my hands as steady as they'd ever been. Danielle and Marcus sorted out the matter of the baby through family court, the right way in the right room. I hope for that little girl's sake they found something solid on the other side of it. She didn't ask for any of this. She's innocent in every way that matters. Danielle and I never spoke again. Some friendships don't break, they just turn out never to have been what you thought they were. You set them down with the rest of it. Gloria, I heard, stopped going to the women's circle she had run for 20 years. The group quietly moved on without her. I felt a small, real sadness about that, the kind you feel for someone who chose the lie right up until it took everything. She wasn't a villain in her own story. She was a mother who loved her son too much to question him, and that love cost her more than she ever would have agreed to pay. There was one last thing I did. I wrote her a letter. A short one. Not angry. Not triumphant. I thought about her standing in my doorway in her Sunday best, a woman who'd been deceived by her own child and chose the deception anyway. And I found I didn't want to carry any bitterness toward her into the rest of my life. Bitterness is just another bag of stones. So I kept it simple. I won't carry your son's lie anymore. Neither should you. I didn't expect a reply. I didn't get one. But writing it closed something. I took off my grandmother's copper bracelet that night and held it for a while, thinking about what she used to tell me. She'd say that true patience isn't just sitting and waiting. It's recognizing the exact moment to act. The moment when silence ends and speaking begins. I had waited 7 years for that moment. It had come. I had met it. And now the time that Bracelet had been counting wasn't borrowed against some future reckoning. It was just mine. The whole quiet rest of my life finally entirely mine. If you take one thing from my story, just one thing, let it be this. Truth does not shout and it does not chase. Just waits, patient as a watch, for the day someone finally stops being afraid and asks the right question in the right room. That's my story. 7 years of a name that was never mine to carry. One calm question in a hospital hallway. And the whole thing came undone. If you have ever been called the broken one, if someone has handed you their shame and let you wear it in public, let this be your sign to set it down. Tell your truth where it counts. Then walk away clean. If this story reached you tonight, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment telling me the moment that hit you hardest. Hit subscribe for the next one. 'Cause there are more stories coming, and they all have the same message. Silence might keep the peace. But the truth? Truth sets you free. I'll see you in the next one.